Hello there, everyone. If you're watching this video, then you are part of the TTOR army, an army that is building itself up one subscriber at a time. As you can see from the title and thumbnail of today's video, today we're going to be talking about YouTube CEO Susan Wojcicki. And because that is the subject of today's video, you know that we're about to engage in some really hilarious comedy, as well as some instances of pointing out the obvious. So I have here on screen an article from reclaimthenet.org titled YouTube CEO Hypocrisy. Susan Wojcicki says she wants as much free speech as we possibly can. Subtitle says, from the head of a platform that censors millions of videos each year. Well, this sounds hilarious. Let's get right into the article. YouTube regularly censors videos, demonetizes creators, and introduces new censorship rules. Yet, in a recent interview, YouTube CEO Susan Wojcicki claimed that the platform wants to enable as much free speech as we possibly can have. Wojcicki made the comments during an interview with Indonesian journalist Najwa Shihab when she was asked for YouTube's view on governments using regulations to curtail free speech. In her response, Wojcicki framed YouTube as a free speech champion. Oh goodness, I can't read that without laughing. Oh. In general, we want to enable political speech, so when we do get requests that would involve suppression of political speech, that's a place where we're very hesitant or resistant to removing it, Wojcicki said. Yeah, sure it is. That's why you banned Computing Forever. That's why you banned Alex Jones and InfoWars. That's why you banned Soph. That's why you banned Stephen Molyneux. That's why you banned E. Michael Jones. That's why you banned Seeking the Truth. It's all because you value political speech and you want everyone to have a voice, even though you've spent years censoring people for expressing their political voice, even though it was perfectly legal for them to do so. If you would like to get a taste of just how bad YouTube censorship is, I would encourage you to check out my YouTube censorship playlist on JoshShoe TV, which I will have a link to in the description box below. But let's get back to the article. She continued by adding the caveat that every case depends on what's happening before making an even bolder claim about YouTube's supposed free speech values. We want to enable people to express their points of view and enable as much free speech as we possibly can have. Oh, goodness. Wojcicki followed up by claiming that YouTube also stands up for free speech against non-democratically elected governments. If you, for example, have a non-democratically elected government and they're asking us to remove content that would be suppressing free speech of people who are being persecuted in some way, that's a place where it would be much harder for us to remove that content, Wojcicki said. We would keep it up. Yeah, as long as it's not the 2020 election in the United States of America where some grand-scale cheating occurred to make sure that Joe Biden won the presidential election over Donald Trump, even though Donald Trump could fill out football stadiums with his rallies and you couldn't get 10 people to show up to a Joe Biden rally when he wasn't living in his basement. Shihab pressed Wojcicki on her purported free speech stance by asking the YouTube CEO whether she believes in censorship. Shihab suggested that censorship could be counterproductive when it comes to fighting misinformation, and that having a free flow of information rather than censorship could be a better solution. Despite claiming that YouTube wants to enable as much free speech as possible earlier in the interview, Wojcicki responded to this question by saying, there are lines that we draw that we think don't make sense for us to have on our platform. Now, if I were to just believe what's written there, Wojcicki's response to, well, maybe there shouldn't be all this censorship on YouTube, her response is, there are lines that we draw that we think don't make sense for us to have on our platform. If I were to just read that as is, I'd be like, huh? So you're admitting that the stuff you censor on YouTube doesn't even make sense why you're doing it? Well, then why are you doing it? But the little ellipses there, the 3 dots, makes me wonder what's being left out of this quotation. So, yeah, I'm not going to hold a hard stance on this paragraph. The YouTube CEO said that adult content was one of the first categories that YouTube banned because allowing it would have changed the nature of YouTube. However, she continued by describing other vaguer categories of content that are banned to appease advertisers. If we have a lot of content that is seen as undesirable or not supporting society or not being responsible, we'll also see pullback from our advertising community. So we want to do the right thing, but we also, as a business, I believe, operate very differently than, say, the internet as a whole, where people can go and post their information. We want to have free speech as long as our advertisers that advertise on our platform are not offended by any individual user's content. So apparently, according to Susan Wojcicki, free speech ends where your advertisers and your corporate media organizations that you literally pour millions of dollars into, that where they begin, that's where free speech ends. This isn't the first time Wojcicki and other high-ranking YouTube executives have attempted to frame YouTube as a free speech platform. Last year, Wojcicki was given a Free Expression Award from a pro-First Amendment group at an awards ceremony sponsored by YouTube. Oh, gee, that's not a conflict of interest. Let's give the Free Speech Award to the person who's sponsoring our ceremony. Yay! She also previously said that celebrating freedom of speech is a core value at YouTube, and earlier this year, YouTube's chief product officer, Neil Mohan, claimed that YouTube is an open platform where anyone can share ideas without gatekeepers. Despite these claims from its executives, YouTube's actions tell a different story. In Q2 of 2022, YouTube removed more than 1 million videos for violating its far-reaching rules around hate speech, harassment, harmful content, and misinformation. This quarter, YouTube has continued to censor popular creators and journalists and update its censorship rules. So as you can tell by this point in the video, this whole thing of YouTube saying, oh yeah, we're champions of free speech and we allow people to express their political views without fear of censorship, that's a load of crock. YouTube has been censoring political speech, mostly from Trump supporters and conservatives and Christians, since 2015. And it's only gotten worse and worse and worse as time has gone on. Lots of popular creators have been banned from YouTube, and they become popular on other sites like BitChute, Odyssey, Rumble, etc. So yeah, all this talk from YouTube about being pro-free speech, don't believe it. It's all lies. They are one of the most censorious websites on the internet. They censor more people sometimes than Twitter and Facebook does, although Twitter and Facebook and YouTube seem to take turns every now and then in who censors people the most. But YouTube is one of the worst websites on the internet when it comes to censorship. If YouTube censorship wasn't so bad, we wouldn't have all these alternatives to YouTube that sprung up in the last 5 years, like BitChute and Odyssey and Rumble and Brighteon and YouTube and NewTube and all the different PeerTube instances, Joshu TV, Censor, I forget what that one website's called, I have to look it up, or even my own website, Quarter. We wouldn't have all these alternatives to YouTube if YouTube was not engaging in mass censorship of wrongthink, if they weren't censoring all kinds of people who were really popular. If YouTube wasn't doing that, we wouldn't have all these YouTube alternatives. Just plain and simple. A good analogy for this situation would be the indie football gaming scene that exists today as a result of the Madden games becoming total garbage in the last 10 years. When EA Sports made a deal with the NFL back in 2004 to make it illegal for anyone but EA Sports to make a NFL football simulation video game, the Madden games were still great back then, and so people had no problems with this whole arrangement. But then as the Xbox 360 PS3 generation came along, and then the Xbox One PS4 generation came along, and now the current generation of the PS5 and whatever the new Xbox model is called, the Madden games have been progressively getting worse and worse until now. The last several Madden games, you could argue the last 10 years worth of Madden games, have been the worst football games ever to hit the market, at least in the AAA scene. They're so bad, in fact, that many alternatives to Madden have popped up in the indie football gaming scene. Franchises like Access Football, Maximum Football, Football Simulator, Mutant Football League, Sunday Rivals, Legend Bowl, and others. There's so many amazingly good or games that are becoming amazingly good in the indie football gaming scene because Madden is horrible and people want a good football game to play instead of being stuck with the horrible Madden games. If the Madden games had continued to stay great or got even better over the last 10 years, then the indie football game scene as it exists would not exist. But Madden does suck, has for at least a decade, and that's why the indie football scene exists. Same thing with YouTube. YouTube has been censoring people since 2015, if not earlier. And because they've been doing this, other alternatives have popped up over the last 5 years, as the ones I mentioned before. And one of those alternatives being my own, called Quarter. Quarter is an open source alt-tech alternative to YouTube that I started a couple months ago. It's already got 79 registered users at the time of this recording. There are videos on the site that have hundreds, if not 1,000 plus views, including our most viewed video, which has over 4,600 views. So things on Quarter are popping right now, and if you want a YouTube alternative that is feature-rich and functional like YouTube, but actually champions freedom of speech, then Quarter is the place that you should go to and upload your content.